2, 1. Hey everybody, we're at the Imp and the Ogre. My name's Paul.
This is Ryan.
And today we're tackling Ravenloft.
Yeah, this is a classic first edition D&D adventure for the usual, half dozen plus PCs. Balanced around sort of 5th level-ish, and it was written by Tracy and Laura Hickman. It was originally published in 1983 by TSR, and you can get the PDF currently on the DM's Guild along with all the other old school goodies. So the bare bones synopsis of this is that the PCs are lured to a rural village that's been tormented by an evil vampire, the first vampire, according to the lore, for hundreds of years, and you basically get trapped in the vampire's domain until he lets you out or you kill him. So the main goal is to track down and kill this vampire and lift the curse of Strahd. Well, that's a different adventure. So in general, I'm just going to have to say that I've always enjoyed Tracy Hickman's work, and sort of as a fanboy standpoint, one of the first D&D adventures I ever played was actually some of the Dragonlance modules that he was a part of, and I also remember reading the Dragonlance novels that he and Margaret Weiss wrote together, and I always enjoyed those a lot. Though I will say their Deathgate cycle is way better and some of my favorite fantasy books ever. So I'll put a soft plug for those of you that haven't checked out the Deathgate cycle. It's really cool stuff. But anyways, back to the actual
DM
adventure.
bias.
DM bias, huge DM bias. In general, I don't know you, Paul, but I really liked the minimalist design of the adventure, and that's not too uncommon in first edition adventures. They tend to be very straightforward, but it's kind of up to preference. There's not much filler in this particular adventure. It's very, here's enough to run it. One nice thing about that, though, is compared to some other adventures that we've talked about, this one's pretty straightforward to introduce into whatever campaign you're running.
Yeah, it's easy.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's not predicated on anything else. Like,
Nope.
it's a very self-contained, mission-based adventure. That being said, I will say it's not the most engaging adventure to read. And I know there's some of us like getting adventures just to read all the fluff in it. And, first edition adventures in general, and this one more so than most, I found was kind of...
They're a bit of a slog to read.
They're more about the details necessary to run the encounters that the PCs run into, more so than learning details about the game world. So that's definitely one thing you sort of noticed as we've gone along, reading all these different editions. As you get closer to the modern era, if you will, the amount of fun stuff for the DM included in adventures has gone up a lot.
Yeah.
That being said, I guess earlier editions, the second edition in particular, I remember there was a lot of setting information. So your fluff came in other booklets.
Right.
But adventures now tend to have a ton of setting fluff in it.
There is, yeah.
Which makes it more fun to read, but it's not necessary, really, for running.
Makes them easier to read.
Yeah. It breaks up the stat blocks.
Monotony.
How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I agree with everything you've said. I think it's a great adventure. I think it does a great job of presenting the world of Barovia and Strahd and kind of that Castlevania-esque theme that people may be familiar with. And I think everything was appropriate to the setting and made it fun for me to read, and I think it would be fun to play through that way.
Yeah, speaking of the theme, you just reminded me there. It is very much that Dracula, Transylvanian theme, and that was sort of one thing I did sort of flag as potentially problematic. Like, if you're running, a medieval European fantasy or a high fantasy with airships and stuff like that, and suddenly you have this very, impoverished Transylvanian thematic adventure, it may not fit as neatly into your campaign world. And it's one thing that changed as they did newer additions and tweaked with Ravenloft in general is they made it a demi-plane, if you will. So it wasn't an actual fixed location. You could be transported to this sort of evil demi-plane.
Right.
And I think that might be a better way of handling it. And when we get to the mists, I'll have some comments regarding that as well, because I think most of my previous information regarding Ravenloft was from second edition, and I knew somebody had the Ravenloft box set, so I remember reading all of that, and I'm pretty sure they'd switched it to a demi-plane at that point. But in the current adventure here, it's a place that you visit.
The mists of Barovia are not a thing in this adventure.
They are a thing, but they're not.
They keep you from leaving. They don't take you somewhere.
They're a poison cloud, effectively, in the first edition adventure. So it's a little bit potentially problematic if you just ran it as is.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing to mention at the start is the tarot cards. Right?
Tarot cards, yeah. You create a deck of tarot cards, which effectively modify how Strahd's played and how PCs are their effectiveness at doing things throughout the game by having their fortunes read. Yeah,
it's very similar to Madness at Gardmore Abbey, if you remember when we talked about that one with the deck of many things. So it serves to randomize some of the elements. It actually determines what Strahd's motivation is for bringing the PCs here. So I guess it serves mostly to increase replayability.
Right.
So you could run the same adventure with the same people more than once, and they wouldn't get the benefit of having done it a first time, right?
And knowing exactly what was going to happen.
Key items move around, motivations move around. So it's neat. It's thematically neat. Now, one thing I didn't enjoy was that they tell you to do this at the start of the game. In the game, there's a gypsy camp that the PCs may visit. And if they visit, it's totally optional. And if they do visit the gypsies, they may get their fortunes read. And if they do,
it changes everything.
And from a DM prep standpoint, I read that and was like, ugh. Right?
It's a pain, yeah.
Yeah, it'd be a pain to go back and do it. So I like the idea, and it might just be better to start the adventure off with the fortune telling, right? Like that could literally just be the first thing that happens, when they're in the inn at the start of this, and instead of making me do prep work and then making me redo prep work.
Yeah.
And it's not the end of the world, but I don't like having my time wasted.
Or end a session with having fortunes read, which is if you're planning on doing this adventure that you could pre-prep that end of a session with the beginning of this to save you from having to do it mid-adventure.
Yeah. So I just didn't like it as is, that it's forcing you to change your prep notes, which, I'm lazy. So it's not really something I was super keen on. But we've seen it a couple of times now, and I do think it's kind of neat to have that randomization aspect in it. But I don't know how much these days people run the same adventure for the same group of people more than once.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so mostly just for DMs so you don't get bored with it. I think, anyways, it just, who knows?
It's in there. Anyway, do what you want with it.
Yeah.
So I guess getting to the hook of the adventure, how do we get the PCs interested in doing what they're doing? We start with Ryan's favorite mechanic, letters. And so your PCs are in insert tavern in whatever place you want to be at, and a nicely dressed man shows up and hands you a letter, which basically says that he wants help saving the love of his life. Come find Russian name guy, Kolyan something or another, and Indira.
Oh, wait, it's Sorry, wasn't it that there was the Burgermeister?
It is the Burgermaster. Yeah, Meister.
Meister. That it's a letter from the Burgermeister of the town, which I can't remember if it has a different name.
Barovia.
No, Barovia is the area. I don't know. I just called it town in my notes. But it was a letter from the Burgermeister asking for aid in protecting his daughter, I think it was, if I remember. I don't have it in front of me, so it's not completely in my brain. And then the idea is that you take the letter, they heed the call to adventure, and then they follow the directions and they go to the county, the fiefdom of Barovia. And this is where actually I wanted to revisit the idea of Barovia as a demiplane in the mists of Barovia and all that type of stuff. Mm-hmm. I do like it better as a mechanic. The PCs start following the directions and maybe they have to set camp and then the mists roll in. And, when they continue on in the morning, they're in Barovia.
Yeah.
Mostly just to deal with the major tonal shifts that can occur. Because this is a very creepy, horror-y type of adventure. And that can be severely at odds with the tone that you've been running so far. So I do kind of like that better as a mechanic. I also don't like the original mists themselves. But because as written, the idea is that the mists are poisonous.
Yeah.
But it's like a slow acting poison that only is an issue if you leave
the castle. Yeah.
Or leave the area.
Yeah.
Right. So the PCs could go, and if they leave, they just die a week later or something. I can't remember the exact timeline.
They do damage over time, I think, as well. So it was. If I'm remembering the adventure, the mists surround the castle once you get there, so you can cross the gates into Castle Ravenloft. But when you try to leave again, the mists are there and they choke you.
I thought it was the whole area. I'd have to pull out the adventure on my phone or something to take a look at it. But I was pretty sure that once you're in Barovia, you can't leave. Maybe. Or you can leave and you get sick and die. Because once you're in the castle, as we'll talk about, you get locked in the castle.
Yeah, you're there.
Effectively. So, I mean, obviously people's, mileage will vary on that. But I think it's kind of interesting from a gameplay standpoint, is if, players did try to leave and, you're walking through the mists and you always sort of end up back where you started, that you can't get out.
Yep.
I like that as a paranoia and horror mechanic than them leaving and they slowly get sick over the days and realize they have to go back.
It's also a nice motivation, right? Like, oh, we have to do this. This is what you're choosing to run. There's no, you can't just, we're not going to do this. When you try and leave, you're just back at the entrance again in that cycle.
Now that being said, if your players hate railroading, it's literally the most railroady mechanic ever. Yeah. Either way, right? Either you're trapping them in this demi-plane until they deal with Strahd, or you're killing them if they don't deal with Strahd, right? So
double-edged sword.
You can't really win from a railroad standpoint, but anyways, it's just because of the tonal shifts. Unless you've been running a very sort of grim, dark campaign, you may have to sort of account for that.
So there's a couple things from the village that I did like. I like the theme that we talked about earlier. Kind of everyone in town wants nothing to do with you. They're in the houses. They're boarded up. Something's wrong. I liked the merchant that was there, that if you try to haggle, he's just like, well, if you want it bad enough, you're going to pay. So everything's marked up and...
Oh, hugely marked up, right? Like it's a huge ripoff.
Yeah. So I thought that was fun. I also did like if you're out at night and happen to be around the graveyard, all these spirits raise from the graves and they'll march towards the castle up into the tower and just huck themselves off the tower. And that's representing the endless failure of PCs that have come to try and slay Strahd.
Yeah, no, I did think that was kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
It's just a random detail. Like it plays no role whatsoever.
No, but those are the things I like. No. So if you're in town and you do go to the burgomaster's place, you find out that he's dead and has been dead. And that Irina was bitten by the vampire.
Yeah, so the letter that recruited the PCs is a forgery. It's a fake. So you don't know who it's from. It's from Strahd. But, it doesn't take very long for the PCs to realize that they've been
Duped,
recruited under false pretenses. So I guess the idea that you sort of learn from talking to Irina and her brother, I mean, I think that's usually how it works out. If you go to the inn and you meet her brother there and then he helps you out type of thing. But it sounds like the idea is that you recruit Irina as an NPC follower, effectively. She's got a level of fighter or something like that. She's got some combat abilities. And basically you learn that you have to defeat the vampire or you're doomed. And everybody else that's ever tried to defeat the vampire over the last 400 years or whatever the timeline they present has died. So it's not really a winning situation for the PCs.
No.
Now one thing I do like about the adventure outside of the castle, right? The castle is a separate beast, is that, on top of sort of very directly telling you that you have to deal with the vampire and eliminate the vampire, the adventure doesn't let you be careful about it. There's no slow exploration and figuring stuff out. Literally, almost every single opportunity that Strahd von Zarovich or whatever it is, the vampire gets, he attacks. So the first night, if they're helping to protect Irina, they're attacked by Strahd and bats and wolves.
Yep.
And every time it can happen, the PCs are going to be attacked by Strahd and or wolves and or bats. So,
am I right? Does he stay for just 5 rounds and then just buggers off? Isn't that?
Yeah. He always. Yeah. It's hit and run tactics.
Yeah. Pops in, beats you up, leaves.
I mean, theoretically, if he was just mopping the floor with you, he'd just finish you off.
Yeah.
He's not actually toying with you, but he's supposed to be played as a super genius. So if he takes any damage whatsoever, he just sort of takes off. But he's also a magic user, so he can just like fly in, zap you with spells, and then fly away and go wahahaha. Like it's designed to be a war of attrition that you can't win. Right, the longer you take, the more resources you're going to lose, and the increased likelihood that
you fail.
So this adventure kind of requires you to have a cleric, because you're not going to have access to any other healing, and natural healing takes forever in early editions. I mean, if you're playing with a 5th edition hack, you just sleep and you wake up. Like, attrition is not a thing that exists in 5th edition sort of rules as written.
Yep.
But if you're running other editions, you want to have your own source of healing. Also, there was that other requirement. We were talking off mic about it, that you have to have in your party. You need to have a
fighter with a longsword.
Fighter with a longsword. Because reasons.
Yeah.
Which hopefully isn't a problem, but, considering this involves a, a 5th, 6 and so on level, PCs, if somebody's been spending their entire career as the battle axe guy, it's like, hey, you just found this awesome longsword. You should totally use it, right? Like it's kind of funny to have as an arbitrary requirement for success, and for reasons that we'll talk about when we get there. Anyway, that was kind of funny. I guess I'm gonna throw in my usual complaint about 5th edition because why not? If you were running this as a modified version for 5th edition, vampires are not nearly as scary in 5th edition as they were in the earlier editions. They don't drain levels on hit. Like that's the big thing, is if you were playing this adventure, every time you fought Strahd, there was a legitimate chance you'd take level loss. He hits you once and you lose PC levels. Right, which is super punitive. Like, that's not fun whatsoever.
No. Yeah.
But that's where the real attrition comes into, right? So because of that change, which is how vampires work in the most recent edition of D&D, it's not I don't know. You can't really do these types of attrition style games with 5th edition rules, mostly because of things like full hit points from a long rest, right? Like you just sleep and you wake up and boom, right? So because of that, because of things like Goodberry from Druids giving you all the food you're ever going to need, you either need to sort of house rule it or just accept the fact that it's not nearly as challenging as it would have been originally designed.
There's not as much danger in 5th edition.
By design.
Yeah.
Whatever. I disagree with that as a design decision, but that's sort of my own particular preference. But, you know, that's the thing with reading these older adventures. Is you're like, man, this seems super hard. And if you're trying to run it using a 5th edition vampire, you're sort of like, it's not nearly as hard. And I guess that's just my own personal bias is like, I think you should be always afraid of losing. And I don't know that I've ever felt that with 5th edition, you know, and DMing it. It doesn't seem particularly scary.
We've come to realize it's more about the narrative, like playing the story as opposed to being part of a dangerous world.
Yeah, which is fine. Like narrative games are fine, but I don't know. D&D is a very combat-heavy narrative game. Yeah, where combat doesn't really seem to matter. Yeah, because you're not supposed to lose. Yeah, so I don't know. It's a separate. It doesn't have anything to do with the adventure. Yeah, it's just sort of my own.
I agree. Yeah, 5th edition.
General complaint. So reading these older adventures where you're just sort of like, man, this seems like it would have been challenging and all of that.
Well, having read so many of these old adventures now and playing 5th edition, that it's like, I almost feel cheated in that I can't lose. You know, like some of the bad decision making isn't as punishing.
At all. Like, your stupid halfling monk just keeps doing the dumbest things ever. And
that's what I mean. It's like he should be dead.
Over and over and over again.
It's like that mechanic in 5e. You just can't seem to die. You can't seem to lose. So then it's just like, how dumb.
He's come close. But,
but anyway, that's another topic for another day or another complaint for another day. But if I feel a little cheated sometimes where I'm like, I'm playing a rash character that is not punished as much for his actions, you know, or like...
Oh, because he's not...
what mechanic would make it good? Like the first time you go unconscious, you get 3 death saves. The second time you get 2 death saves. The next time you get 1. Like how... Like there should be a mechanic that's like the more you go unconscious, the more likely chance you have of dying.
Yeah, it'd even be okay if there was things like res sickness in older editions where... Or you lost a level. Yeah. Right? Like you could... come back, but you come back with like an XP penalty or something. There's no long-term penalty to dying. No. Which is ridiculous.
When you got a cleric that's just like bonus actioning your heal and then you're back up and then you can start over.
But even like, was it a 5th level cleric can get revitalized or whatever it's called? Revivification or what have you. But like the game should have some sort of penalty for dying.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, it's a completely random aside. I remember reading somewhere, like, it's the Wolverine argument, right? Like, Wolverine can't die, right? So, I remember reading something once that talked about that you can explain everything about Wolverine by the fact that he has PSD because he still feels pain and he still dies. So, he's got all of the trauma from all of the violent and pain that he's experienced, but he just doesn't die. Yeah. So... You know, that type of psychological trauma from dying and seeing what's beyond, you know, and it should have some sort of psychological effect, if not an actual game effect. But
House rules,
yeah.
All right, so I guess back to what we're supposed to be talking about. Once you muck around in the village for a bit, optional, you can go visit the gypsy camp, and which we talked about earlier. You can... optional visit a gypsy who will read your fortune as a PC, which changes the mechanics of the game,
but doesn't actually provide any benefit.
Yeah, it's just something that's in there. Moving beyond that, a horse carriage arrives to take the PCs to the castle, and once you're in the horse carriage, there's no choice but to be on the railroad tracks, and you're going to the castle. Castle
Ravenloft.
The Castle Ravenloft. So it takes you there. I did enjoy that you have to cross a drawbridge on the way there, and there is just a flat 5% chance that a PC can board and just die. So it's, it's like from the get-go, there's that 5% chance that you're 1 in 20 that you could just die. So.
It's the random cruelty of first edition D&D for sure.
Yeah, I guess Castle Ravenloft. I mean, there's lots of cool encounters with wraiths, spiders, ghouls, zombies, bats, gargoyles. They get you the castle vibe going real quick.
It's very, Castlevania. I did like that there's that bait and switch aspect right at the start. So when you arrive,
the organ,
the torches are lit, and it's all beautiful, and there's nobody around, but you sort of get led by the light to the banquet hall, and there's this beautiful meal laid out for you, and Strahd's playing on the organ, right? And then he, laughs maniacally, and all the lights go out, and it's an illusion, effectively. But it starts off very creepy, but what's going on? And then all the lights go out, and the food's actually rotten or something like that, and then they're all alone in the dark. And then the adventure. And then they hear the sound of the drawbridge rising and the portcullis falling, and then you're trapped in the dark with a vampire. Yeah,
and another thing that I liked about, like, as you move through the castle is they did a good job of, like, setting ambiance that you're in an old castle. There's, like, gusts of wind that'll close doors, and the creaking of whatever, and the eyes on statues will follow you around. Wind will extinguish torches as you enter a room. Just kind of, you're not in a good place.
It's designed to have that haunted house, spooky vibe. Now, it's huge. Castle Ravenloft, I can't remember how many rooms are described. Lots.
And lots of rooms that have absolutely nothing in them.
Yeah, so it's a honkin' environment, but while I normally dislike giant dungeons for reasons that I don't really want to get into right now, I didn't find this too bad, mostly because there's a goal, right? Like, you're not just sort of wandering around clearing out rooms. You're trying to find and eliminate the vampire, and there's clues as to how to do that as you go along. So it's a bit of a MacGuffin hunt to find all the bits and pieces that you need for success, and then ultimately you need to find Strahd's crypt and kill him, right? Because again, the expectation is you're not supposed to rest while you're in here, because you get attacked again. Like, you're in Strahd's castle, he's gonna get you if you try to sleep. So that's the one thing that I was trying to sort of math out. Like, I don't actually think you could successfully clear, make it through all the non-optional encounters to be able to get to Strahd with enough resources to be successful. Now, that being said, if you could, if your PCs find a room and barricade themselves, no windows and stuff like that, I don't think it's unreasonable to say that they can hide someplace and camp out at night. But, you can be quite cruel in here, but you don't want to make it a death trap, right? I mean, I'm all for having difficult situations. I'm not super pro unwinnable situations, right? Like, it shouldn't just be an auto lose for the PCs by any means. No, I don't want to talk about everything because it's going to get really boring if, and then there was bats, and then there's an animated statue. And
I will say that I did like the thing about bats, that, like, if there's bats around, spellcasters have to make a dexterity save to cast their spells, which is, I don't know, neat. Something that's lost in, I think, new editions.
Yeah, it's a cool environmental effect, right? And I don't think those get used enough. I mean, I think a good encounter should probably have an environmental aspect of it. And I actually forgotten about that. But it totally makes sense that, like, if
bats in your hair and
flying everywhere, that you should have to make. I mean, it'd be a concentration check, I guess, these days. But that totally makes sense. In terms of sort of non-combat encounters, I thought there was some pretty cool stuff in there. I liked the NPCs. I liked Strahd's minions.
Yeah.
Effectively.
The crazy cook.
The butler. He's a butler. He's multi.
Cyrus.
Yeah. So you basically have the vampire's familiars in there, and they're not hostile. They're not necessarily helpful.
Yeah.
But they're not intrinsically hostile. So you got the butler, who's just creepy, can give you some directions and tell you about the layout of stuff. I like the fact that he's described as just checking out all the PC's gear, because he's so used to adventurers showing up and dying, and he has to clean up the mess effectively. So he gets to keep all their stuff. So he's got a big accumulated treasures of all of the former adventurers that have been brought here by Strahd over the years. And then I just thought the accountant was a nice touch. The thought that, Strahd needs somebody to do his bookkeeping. And he still has expenses and all of that type of stuff. And I liked that the accountant has the little bell that he can ring to summon backup if the PCs are hostile or want to rob him or anything like that. He can pull on a cord and summon defenders. It was just a nice touch. There's some very nice descriptive touches in this to sort of help continue on with the theme, of the haunted castle.
That you're in someone's manor too. It's not just he's not on his own. Like he has.
It's not abandoned, right? Like it's he lives here. He's evil, but he still has,
taxes.
People on the payroll.
I think one of the things that we did want to talk about was the Guardian of Sorrow.
Oh, yes.
The tower,
yes.
which is one of the towers at Strahd's castle, is this massive animated tower that once you're in it, it starts moving and shaking and pitching around. And
it's basically a trap.
Yeah. But to defeat the encounter, you got to get to the top of the tower and kill a beating heart.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
A giant hanging, basically, you can see it glows, right? It's this big crystal beating or glass heart that beats. So you have to destroy that to kill the Guardian of Sorrow. And what I thought was interesting is there's literally no explanation for why this exists. Right? Like it's so out of the norm for everything else that's in the castle. And then you have this super weird animated tower that's totally optional. Like a lot of the stuff in the castle is optional because you don't really need to get there. But trying to get to the top, it's shaking, so you need to make saves so you don't fall. And then there's halberds that are hanging from the walls that like attack you as you go along. Like it's super difficult to get to the top, and there's like not necessarily anything at the top.
Well, there isn't anything at the top. You just stop the thing. I like though that like you can choose to make saves if you want to run up and try to get up quickly, or you can crawl and not have to make saves at all.
You're a sitting duck for the halberds if you just crawl, because it takes forever to get up there. Going back to the NPCs before I forget, I like that there was some evil NPCs too, right? Like there's all of these people that you encounter, good and bad, throughout the thing. Like there's the werewolf that's being punished in the cell.
Oh yeah.
Right? That you can quote unquote rescue.
Yeah.
And he'll betray you at the first opportunity that, he can look good.
Yeah.
And then there's one of Strahd's vampire brides that you can recruit. But we didn't mention when we talked about the town, but one of the things you can find out of the town is that a girl has gone missing. And you can find her, like she's going to be one of Strahd's wives, effectively. She hasn't been bitten or anything yet. So there's all of these other individuals that you find as you go through that you have no idea if they're good, if they're bad. I mean, I guess there's probably some magic that you can use. So you can't just go around and kill everybody because some are just legitimate lost souls. Oh, and one thing I thought was hilarious is, there's the random encounter table, and there's always random encounter tables. But one of the outcomes is it's a mob of angry villagers with pitchforks and torches, and they join up with you, and they just follow you around calling for Strahd and burn him. Like, so they're just super loud, and it increases the likelihood of all future random encounters. So you pick up a bunch of like helpful, quote unquote, villagers, and it just makes your life more difficult. And I can just picture a group of players trying to deal with a bunch of enthusiastic but way out of their element it's an angry mob, effectively.
Yep.
No, you just go wait in the courtyard, right? Just, you'd sit around and do nothing, and we'll take care of this. I just thought that was kind of hilarious. I mean, there's a million traps and whatnot. One puzzle that I thought was kind of interesting. It's not particularly difficult, but there's a room with these iron golems that are holding crystals of different colors, and the PCs can figure out that different doors can be unlocked by burning the different crystals in this brazier that's there. And I thought that it was a neat layout. Like, it's not complicated. I think, there's different color combinations and whatnot that you need to figure out.
It's like a nice trial and error type puzzle.
And there's, severe punishments for messing up, right? There are iron golems that can squash you.
Yep.
But just from, mixing things up a little bit, a nice little not super complicated puzzle, I liked. It was just something that jumped out at me.
Mm-hmm. I made note of it too. Yeah, it was a neat puzzle. And you can find the deck of many things. That was in there.
Oh, yeah. I guess in the other... of all the traps, of which there are, the standard arrow traps and spike traps and that type of thing, this adventure has so far the best trap environmental effect, or whatever you want to call it, that I have ever come across.
Yeah, it's very creative. And I think we're talking about the teleportation traps in the catacombs.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you get to the catacombs eventually, and around the coffin, there's several teleportation traps that PCs can kind of walk beyond the threshold, and then they're instantly teleported and replaced by a ghoul wearing all of their gear and looking looking exactly the same, So your PC ends up naked inside of a coffin, and you're replaced by this undead wearing all of your gear and looking just like you.
So as far as the rest of the party sees, you just sort of walk down the hallway and suddenly you turn into an undead monster that tries to kill you using your own equipment. And I don't even know how that would play out, right? It is amazing, but I also think it just spells certain doom for whoever got teleported. Like, you get basically stuck in a coffin, which if you're strong enough, you can push your way out of. But we didn't specifically talk about any of Strahd's potential motivations. One of his motivations is he wants to leave. And to do that, he's planning on stealing one of the party's identities. And this is one of the ways that he can do that, is he will kill the person who ends up in the coffin all by themselves. And believe it or not, a PC without any equipment, naked, fighting a vampire is probably going to lose. And then he'll just polymorph into that person and get rescued, and that'll be it. Like, he'll just become the PC. Yeah. And you'll never be able to find the vampire. And eventually you'll just leave. You'll be like, oh, okay, that's weird. Let's go.
Yeah. He's not here.
I guess the mists went away. Let's leave. And then Strahd escapes from Barovia, which I guess, or just decides to adventure around. I mean, I think that would be a hilarious bait and switch for something future. You just give the PC, the player whose PC was effectively killed, you just say, like, yeah, you got rescued. You're actually Strahd now. And then
you just want to be an adventurer,
He just wants to go on a bit of a walkabout, I guess. And I thought that was just cruel in maybe a hilarious kind of way.
Yeah, like, it'd be fun.
It kind of would depend on your players. I mean, any type of situation where you have your players being replaced can be problematic.
But this is like the ruthless charm of the old adventures that I like, is like there's assumed risk.
Yeah.
That's not, you're not just going in to win. We're going in, we might not all come back. It's sort of like the mentality, and it's just like exploring things was dangerous. And I think your players, when people were playing this, kind of that's what they were used to. It's like, well, we may die. We had a good run.
Yeah, I think it's definitely less about the narrative of the character or the expectation that you would just survive until you reach 20th level, right? Which never happens.
No.
People just get bored and then you stop playing.
What a fun way to like end a character, you know? Like, you're probably going to remember that more than like the time you went and won everything in the crypt.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, a memorable death is something you talk about for years. You never talk about all the times you win.
It's like every old war movie ever, some warrior thing, you know, I want to die an honorable death, you know, you'll be remembered forever. That's like, everyone wants to go out like that. Maybe not to like being naked in a coffin, but it's still fun and funny, you know?
But the years later, you'll remember the time that your character died naked in a coffin. Then the time, you know, you found the vampire and you killed him because we always win, right? Like it's it's just the memorable aspects of it.
I thought like the crypts overall were pretty great. Like if you do manage to explore everything, you find like ancient architects that Strahd had killed and different princes and all these, you know, interesting and famous people that he had buried in his crypt, which I thought was like nice flavor as well.
It's huge. I mean, once again, like all of this is enormous. I mean, I guess I should mention that through talking to people, and the gypsies and whatnot, it's possible to sort of learn about certain items that can give you information about how to deal with the vampire. Like the reason why the adventure is supposed to have a warrior that has a longsword is because, you know, one of Strahd's motivation can be for destroying this blade, the Sun Sword, I guess, that apparently he only has part of because it was his brother's and part of it disappeared. So I mentioned previously that this is a MacGuffin hunt in the castle. Yeah. But there's a bunch of different things you can find that will give you clues as to where Strahd can be found, the history of the whole situation, and you can learn about the existence of the Sun Sword, which makes fighting the vampire much easier because, you know, vampires don't like sun, and it's a sword that's basically designed to deal with vampires effectively. So if you manage to find all these things and getting to Strahd, then it's not super scary, I guess would be the way to think about it. But the size of the dungeon is enormous. So trying to find all these things without information becomes difficult. Yep. So that was the one sort of flag I had, is it could be a little bit better at guiding the players to their goals, right? Because there's all these tools in place that should make their lives easier. And I think they're talking to some of the NPCs, I'm trying to remember, can give you some suggestions that they might exist.
I think there's like notes that the Sun Sword was a thing. You would never know that your character holds part of it or what you're looking for. That, you know, they're instantly reunited as a blade when the hilt and the blade come together, but you'd never know that
explicitly. There, I think either the accountant or the butler can let the players know about the icon of Ravenkind, which is a clerical item that will definitely make your life easier fighting any of the undead. Actually, getting that early makes dealing with a lot of the monster, you know, the zombies and other undead monsters a little easier in it. But, you know, finding this stuff, because it's spread basically all over the place, could be difficult. On one hand, we're complaining about 5th edition being too easy, and on the other hand, I'm sitting here going like,
this is difficult.
Is this too difficult? Right. I guess this ties into the resting mechanic, right? The more that you're able to rest, the less of an issue this is.
But I mean, potentially we're looking at 8 players that are 7th level?
Yeah.
How long does it take to wear out 8 PCs?
I think that's actually part of the issue I have discussing this, is I have minimal experience actually playing that style of old school game. Like, I mostly played 2nd edition and mostly with like 4 or 5 PCs. And then since then, you know, 3rd edition, Pathfinder, and 5th edition has always been smaller groups. So like, I don't actually know how challenging most of these encounters would be for 6 8th level PCs.
That's it, right? Like how many? Okay, 8 PCs. 3 of them could potentially be clerics. You could be completely loaded up with heals and cures, and so it's like I've never done it either or played it, but it just seems like it may not be as bad as we're giving it credit for, right? But then again, there's things that can instantly kill you. And
so there's the roll of the dice aspect of it, right? And I know it's not uncommon for people to die and what have you, but like in the castle, there's no way to get out, right? There's no way to bring in somebody else, right? You can't bring in one of your cohorts. I mean, then again, the assumption is that you're coming with, your entourage of retainers and whatnot, and they're just hanging out, right? The adventure as written doesn't seem to expect that because they wouldn't all fit in the carriage, like how big is this carriage?
Infinite. Carriage of holding.
Carriage of holding. It's much bigger on the inside. I don't know. I mean, that would be the only issue I could see. Like, I even with those sort of caveats in place, I don't see how you could handle all the challenges with a reasonable sort of resource usage standpoint, like assuming average hits and average damage taken and all that type of stuff. I don't see, you couldn't clear this in one day, like one adventuring day, right? Like you couldn't clear this in one game session, like not at all. Like there's too much stuff going on to do. But because of sort of the limitations that exist for recovery, the fact that you will be attacked again, right?
I guess you could like accumulate fatigue and exhaustion while you're in there. It's because you wouldn't be able to rest. Depends how long it would take you. Yeah,
you'd have to do. I mean, on the other hand, if you're super lucky, you stumble upon everything you need very quickly. You find out that the crypts exist. You figure out where down there Strahd's going to be.
Yeah,
I mean, in a certain extent, like a lot of these encounters are avoidable.
Yeah. Right. It'd be very easy to be like, oh, there's no way he's at the top of the tower and not go up there.
Or down in the tomb, right? There, like you were talking about, there's a ton of different crypts that you can check out, but they have names on the outside.
Yeah.
And only one of those names is Strahd's.
Yeah.
So you don't need to go into any of them. Actually, now that I remember, I think there's actually is it Strahd's parents' tomb or his brother's? One of the places is protected. Like there's the aura of goodness aspect. Like there's somewhere in the crypts, and I don't remember if it's his brother or if it's his parents, but like one of the crypts, there's a mention that the area is sort of infused with goodness. And I don't think it explicitly says that this could be a safe place to sleep, but I think you could maybe make it a safe place, a place that's uncorrupted by the evil of the vampire, or maybe again the shrine or the chapel where they find the icon of Ravenkind. You could just make a couple of rooms,
safe spots,
that are protected, right? Protected, air quotes. You can still have screaming at them all night long from just beyond.
I'm trying to sleep.
So you can still impress upon them that danger aspect of it, but maybe give them an opportunity to recharge their batteries.
Yeah.
Make it a little less punishing. I don't know. You'd have to sort of figure it out and see how they've been stomping everything, then it's not really.
If you've got 4 PCs, you probably need somewhere for them to sleep.
Concern. Yeah, it's sort of the balancing aspect of it. I mean, first and second edition conversion to 5th edition is actually pretty straightforward. You just tweak a couple of stats.
Yeah.
I think that aspect of it is probably more of the concern, as I don't know how many people these days play with a party of 7 people. From perusing Reddit on occasion, it's not unheard of. Like there's definitely enough posts I've seen where people are like, oh, well, how am I supposed to deal with this party of 8? And I'm like, you don't deal with a party of 8. You run 2 parties of 4 on different days and enjoy double the D&D. Like, There's no...
Because they've min-maxed and they have 7 clerics and 1 fighter.
We're all paladins. And we're the holy order of vampire slaughterers, right? It just the logistics of how they used to do this stuff. Like, I don't know how you get anything done.
I just think, like, back when these were written in the 80s and late 70s, that there probably just wasn't that many people playing D&D. So if they wanted everyone to play, you just had 7 guys that you knew that played together. Maybe that's why they're written to be...
Yeah, I don't
big.
know. I mean, I wasn't a part of the scene, obviously. I'm not quite that old. But reading about how it used to be, it was a lot of drop-in stuff. Mm-hmm. Like you just have a game night at a game store, and it was however people showed up.
Yeah.
But I don't know why the default became one DM with a bunch of players instead of, 2 DMs with fewer players. Right. I mean, we've had this discussion before, but like optimally, I kind of agree that maybe 3 players, like how many friends, like getting people together is super hard. And this is mostly like I'm an old man, so it's difficult to get a bunch of old people together in a room that don't make time for it. But even, when I was a teen, the logistics of getting 5 or 6 people together to hang out was not super...
I think like even still, it's like mostly logistics, but like game balance. I think it's just more fun when there's a challenge. Things are challenging when there's 3. You might not have your optimal makeup, like once you start getting into the 5, 6, 7, then people are like, oh, well, he's already a mage. I don't need to be a mage. And then it ends up being this like, what does the party need mentality? And like some of the old adventures are written that way, where it's like you should have at least one of each of the playable character classes, and then beyond that it doesn't matter, right? So
it was very much fighter, mage,
healer,
thief, and cleric. Like a party of 4 is the default, and I can say that I can agree with that to a certain extent, but that does limit the options. If that's the expectation, then you don't need to have any more than 4 classes. You should have those 4 classes. The problem with like a party of 3 is the expectation then you have to have a cleric?
Well, I think people feel like you do.
I mean, less so in 5th edition and 4th edition for that matter too. There was a lot of mechanics put into place to limit the need of a cleric. And I think that's why they now have the full heal upon arrest, right? You're magically healing your wounds, or however you want to think of what hit points actually are. So yeah, I don't know. Because I don't know how much further down the rabbit hole I actually want to go when it comes to that particular nuance. But I guess it's just mostly like reading these old adventures. I do have maybe more difficulty appreciating how difficult it actually is, because I can't visualize the effectiveness of 7 PCs, right? Because I guess that is one thing thinking about in that context. When you run into these monsters, there's not a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, right? I mean, I've ran a game with 6 or 7 people there, and it's like impossible. Yeah. Like it's impossible to create a situation where they're challenged, because action economy shifts so greatly immediately. But in any case, you can
gang up on them super easily. So yeah, maybe what I'm thinking is like, oh, that's a tough encounter. It's like, no, it's not. They all just wail on them and they die super quickly. Yeah. And they use minimal resources, and then, because there's so many people attacking that the zombies don't even get a chance to attack.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess maybe I'm over anticipating the
difficulty. Maybe.
I don't know.
But yeah, haven't run it. Final thoughts on Ravenloft?
Ravenloft. Again, vampires are difficult as designed back then. But then again, if you're just fighting one vampire with 7 people, it's either going to spread around the level drain or just dump it on one person, which doesn't affect the party as much. So Strahd's tough and probably should escape. I mean, it's one of those things that with vampires, because of their abilities,
they just turn into mist at the end of the day.
They can turn into mist. You basically got to find him during the day and axe him that way, which is why finding his tomb is. So in the end, you should kill him. To win the adventure, you need to kill him. And that will lift the mists of Barovia, and the curse is lifted, and then you can go about your business. I guess the poison inside you is not a thing anymore after that point. Or maybe I know there's potions somewhere. Because the gypsies all get potions. So maybe you're supposed to find potions from the gypsies. I can't remember specifically. The one thing that I didn't care for was the optional ending that's tied to this. If you remember reading that, like, this is totally a sidebar, so you don't need to do it whatsoever. But the optional ending is that you find out that, was it Ileana? I guess her name is a reincarnated Tatiova. So over the course of the adventure, you find out the sordid history. Basically, Strahd conquered the area and set up his castle there, and fell in love with the beautiful young girl from town, but she fell in love with his younger brother because Strahd was an old man at that time, effectively. And Strahd became insane with jealousy and killed his brother. And then Tatiova jumped off the parapets to escape him, finding out the horror. Her body was never. And then Strahd became a vampire because of reasons. The evil act was so evil that the evil eviled him, right? Like, it doesn't really matter specifically. So that's the Coles Notes version of the sordid history of the von Zaroviches. But when you kill Strahd, you find out that Ileana, the girl that's been tagging along with you that Strahd was trying to turn into his bride, is actually the reincarnated Tatiova. And Strahd's little brother's spirit shows up to collect her, and then they both walk off on a sunbeam into the clouds, and that's... everybody lives happily ever after.
So beautiful.
It's a certain level of cheese that I don't like.
Alternate ending in a video game.
Yeah. So obviously different people have different opinions on what, fits in their campaign. But for me, I don't think I would bother. I didn't feel that it actually added anything or added closure to it. I mean, I think you could still maybe have a scene with, you could have Strahd's brother or even Tatiova's ghost. Like, you could probably put more ghost themes in there somewhere if you wanted to. Or even just have a big scene of, like, all the spirits that have been trapped in Barovia breaking free and flying off into the heavens or getting sucked down, however you want to.
The old spirits from the graveyard coming and helping you defeat Strahd.
Or actually,
to throwing themselves off the cliff, That
would actually be kind of a thematically cool thing, is that like
the death blow is actually the spirits of the old heroes killing Strahd as opposed to you killing Strahd.
Or maybe when you are the person holding the sun sword, when you encounter Strahd, his younger brother's spirit comes and helps to infuse you, and you get an extra bonus or something like that. Like, I think you could tie the themes in there maybe a little more elegantly than that. Also, I put the point on, I kind of prefer the idea that Strahd should win. Like, it just, from a iconic evil bad guy that, I mean, obviously became more iconic with the years than he was initially. He was just a random vampire in this first thing. But I kind of like the idea that they either he wins and allows them to leave for whatever reason. I mean, granted, if he took over one of their places, that's the whole point, right?
Yeah.
The other thing I actually kind of liked, because I'm that kind of DM, is that if you're running this as the demiplane, then the Mists of Barovia protects Strahd. So as you're going in for the killing strike, like, the mists come in, and then when they lift again, you're no longer in the castle, you're back on the road, and you're just like, what? Like, the players would feel super cheated, but that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
And you could then have Barovia come up again, and you could have Strahd be more of a recurring villain if you wanted to. I just thought that, was great. I made a little note here that Barovia protects its master. Like, I like that idea that became more of a...
Like, why has he lived so long? Why has nobody been able to defeat him?
Yeah, and the idea that Barovia is demiplane and sort of semi-conscious became built on more as the editions progressed. And I haven't read Curse of Strahd. We only did the Death House intro bit of it, so I don't know how much of that persists in the modern edition. But I just sort of like that idea that there's demi-planes that are ruled by certain entities.
That'd be very cool.
But in general, like, I think it's super cool. Why would I recommend this over Curse of Strahd when you can get a 5th edition game in general? This one's $5 and comes as a PDF. Would be the big one. I mean, that's my largest complaint so far with the newer editions is they're only available as hardcover books, and I already have enough D&D books on a bookshelf from previous editions that I don't need to clutter it up anymore. So
fair enough.
Anyways, that's about it. There's some pretty cool parts in this. It's if you like sort of a vampire-y
vampire theme's good
theme. So in general, it's not my favorite one that we've done, but
no. I think that's it.
Yeah, the transposition teleportation trap.
Yeah. Insert teleportation trap into anywhere. It's fun. It's
worth the price of admission. Like, honestly, I think getting that was probably worth the cost.
It's just so clever. It's so clever.
It's just something I never would have thought of, and just to it's the type of thing when I read it, I'm like, I can't wait to stick that in one of my adventures just to play out.
Agreed.
Anywho, I think that I'm
all right, guys. I think that's all we have to say on Ravenloft. Next week, we are jumping over to Lamentations of a Flame Princess and talking about the God That Crawls.
All right. As always, thanks for listening.
Thank you.